I know it's been a while, what with the retrostatic radio and Killing 15 Minutes taking precedence. However, hello and welcome to Then and Now, where I, AJ Carey, talk way too much about the first issue of a title, and then the newest first issue of that same title. It did start as an old versus new kind of thing, but is now mostly discussing the growth of characters and the evolution of comics, or me just being an old fanboy yelling at the sky. Now today is somewhat special because while this was originally writing up a first issues that got way too wordy, I then decided that it will be either this or the Birds of Prey that I teased way too long ago. And since you can read the title, or if you're following me on my Twitter at AJC_doesitall, then you'd have seen the poll I ran, and Tim Sheridan himself shared it to generally throw the poll away and pull it just from Birds of Prey. However, next week will be Birds of Prey, if it's not cursed, since this would actually be the third poll that Birds of Prey has lost. Yeah, I have to stop putting it up against more topical comics. Anyway, so yes, Twitter, and yes, it's the only thing I will willfully dead name, was ablaze with discussions of Alan Scott, because of Tim Sheridan calling out the very conservative group that I won't say is a hate group, but I will say that they do like using misogyny, racism, anti-trans, and overall bigoted ideology to shield their own work, and are officially a political action group according to Ethan Van Sciver. Well, anyways, that's what their leadership does, but most of it is just that they have YouTube channels and sometimes put out comics as channel swag, more than trying to be in the market. That is its own rant, and it may come shortly, if I ever finish the script, just to say there is a reason that I call most of them New Wave Worthams. Regardless, Sheridan made a buzz with being one of the few mainstream creators to fully call them out in 2020s, and that then led to a lot of people braying about Alan Scott as though we're back in the New 52 Earth 2 relaunch. It did make me feel a bit nostalgic, though. However, as always, I'm going to reserve judgment about whether or not the comic is actually worth sticking his neck out for, or if we got another iffy take on Alan Scott, which frankly happens a lot more than even the people now jumping to wiki research will know. But anyways, as always, before we get into the then and now, it's time for the title history. Let us rewind back to 1940. It was a leap year. Neat. World War II was in full swing, American comics were still in their golden age, and more were coming. I actually truly love the creation of Alan Scott. So his creator, freelance cartoonist and son of Jewish immigrants, as is often the case with 40s comic creators, Martin Nodell saw the opera Der Ring der Nibelungen. I know I probably butchered that, but he had the idea of a superhero with magical powers brought forth from a magic ring. Then, a little bit later, at the 34th Street subway station in Manhattan, he saw one of the trainmen waving a lantern down the track. When it showed green that the track was clear, it all came together in his mind. The magic ring would be powered by a magical green lantern. With a dash of Chinese folklore and Greek mythology, and flipping through a telephone book for the name Alan Scott, his pitch was ready. Max Gaines, a co-owner of All American Comics, flipped through it, loved it, and told him to get it finalized for print. Nodell had the idea in January 1940, and All American Comics number 16, the first appearance of Green Lantern, hit the spinner racks, or whatever the 1940s equivalent was, in July of that year. Written by Bill Finger, yes, that Bill Finger, and drawn by Martin Nodell. And Green Lantern was a popular character in the comic, as shocking as it may not seem now. And the winter after his debut, he would also be a founding member of the first intercompany super team, the Justice Society of America, in All-Star Comics number 6, and even being the chairman in number 7. Now, while we aren't going to get into how it goes, he'd be off and on in the group until becoming a more stable member after a few years. But I think it's because he was exceptionally popular in both All-American Comics and All-Star Comics that in 1942, he got his very own solo series. Green Lantern Volume 1, Issue 1 dropped November 1941, with writer Bill Finger and Martin Nodell returning. It lasted 48 issues before the decline of superhero comics would lead to a lot of cancellations or reinventions of the characters, to skew away from the capes and cowls crowd. However, a fun fact that I always love bringing up is that Green Lantern actually had a pet sidekick for a while named Streak, who was, at least from all accounts, far more popular than Green Lantern, to the point where he would have his own B stories. He would even be solo on the cover of many of his books because he sold that well. So yeah, superheroes were out and westerns were in, so Alan Scott's last proper Golden Age appearance was in 1951 in All-Star Comics number 57. Yep, that's it, that's all. Okay, it is now time to get nuts when it comes to Alan Scott's history. Because, boy, is it a thing. In 1959, Julius Schwartz relaunched Green Lantern as Hal Jordan with that sci-fi twist rather than the mystical. But even in that 8 years, the Golden Age heroes were still fairly popular, which is why the Flash would cross over and Earth 2 was introduced, which it did include Alan Scott debuting in the Silver Age with Flash number 137 in 1963, 12 years after his last appearance. Now, throughout the 60s and 70s, as was the popular thing for Earth 2 and JSA members, I did bring this up in my Reader's History of Catwoman, Part 1, if you want to give that a listen, about how Earth 2 Golden Age was just reintroduced in their own comic series, as separate from the main continuity, but did have dedicated books that would follow those stories. The Justice Society got their own one of these books with a revival of All-Star Comics, using the numbering from the previous run, so starting at number 58. This is probably the more popular idea of the JSA pre-crisis, where we get new characters like Power Girl, or the daughter of Batman and Catwoman, Helena Wayne, the Huntress. However, when the DC explosion happened that launched these dozens of books, there inevitably came the big crunch and the DC implosion, where a lot of comics were canceled or shifted to consolidate losses. That's where All-Star Comics did get canned after 17 issues, but the JSA would be shifted to Adventure Comics, before that got canceled. However, in 1981, thanks to Roy Thomas coming back from his exclusive deal with Marvel, he was able to get then EIC Jerry Conway to greenlight a book where he got to write his beloved team. That's how All-Star Squadron started, and yes, Alan Scott was there. Yes, I know this seems to be about the JSA, but basically that's Alan Scott's history too. See, in 1986, DC Editorial wanted to cut out all the insanity of multiple worlds, and combined everything into one timeline and one Earth. And thus the massively known and talked about and kinda dissected work that is Crisis of Infinite Earths was made. Sidebar, I actually think, and I haven't really heard a lot of comic personalities talking about this when they talk about this, but I think it was relaunched to get the Silver Age out of the air. Yes, DC Comics was bogged down with multiple timelines, like 4 different versions of Superman were running around, but in the 80s, the CCA, the Comics Code Authority, had become Swiss cheese, with basically just don't show nipples being the main thing, and even then, they worked it around. But the Silver Age really was still in the pop culture. At least on the pop culture level, more people thought about Batman in the Adam West way, even in the 80s, when in the comics he was dark and brooding and dealing with murders. A lot of blood too. So a huge earth-shaking event would get people talking and really reset the clock. No, not that one, Dr. Manhattan. Put that down. I actually have a similar executive mindset on the New 52, but that was a bit less thought out. Well, I say that, but Hawkman kind of really proves that no reboot is without sin. Right, okay, so the Crisis of Infinite Earths happen. And in 1986, we see the Justice Society written out of continuity. Again. With the one-shot Crisis follow-up, The Last Days of the Justice Society of America. They weren't exactly killed off or disintegrated, but rather, everyone was put in a pocket dimension so that they could come back eventually. And we will get to more Alan Scott, I swear. Like right now. Alan Scott appeared again as a ghost, or whatever you want to call interdimensional apparitions, to Hal Jordan in Green Lantern Volume 3, number 19. Where we get a very, very different origin for his ring. But I don't care, Martin Nodell actually returned for the final chapter in this, so there is this really nice 50th anniversary for the character, and it ties up and I love it. And yes, I know I really haven't given his origin, hopefully one of the comics will do it for me later. So anyways, this new origin would tie him to the Green Lantern Corps, where his magic ring was actually possessed by the spirit of Yalan Gur. And his cool different lantern was their lantern, but Yelan had corrupted it, so the Guardians changed the yellow weakness to wood so that the villagers of the time could stop her. Yeah, either way, that led to a story where Hal wants to find out how to free Alan Scott. That really didn't matter, though, because... Oh, actually, before we get into Armageddon, in 1991 there was an 8-issue miniseries showing the Justice Society in what I think is their first title actually called Justice Society, which did show the team in a 50s era during that time. Okay, anyways, back to Alan Scott. In comes Wave Rider during the whole Armageddon 2001 event. But more importantly, we have the follow-up called Armageddon Inferno, which brings back the JSA who were trapped in Asgard's Ragnarok cycle. Yeah, I really do need to do a JSA breakdown one of these days because, oh boy. Yes, the Justice Society comes back young and virile, and had an ongoing that lasted about 12 issues. With that cancellation in 93, the next big thing for the JSA, most everyone dies in 0 Hour. Yep. And Extant, the villain from that, sucked the chronal energy out, so Jay Garrick, the OG Flash, Wildcat, and Alan Scott are the only survivors, but they are old and wrinkly and kinda grumpy. But this leads to one of my favorite ongoings, JSA, which has the 3 OGs teaming up with awesome folks and truly does deal very well with generational legacy and a reason why I probably have a respect and understanding for legacy characters. Well, that and Wally West being my Flash. Plus, we get to see Alan Scott dealing with his grown children now, Jade and Obsidian. Fun fact, Obsidian being openly gay, that's not actually sitting great with his father. But it works really well, and JSA grows the character phenomenally, compared to everything else that has to deal with Alan Scott. Oh, I forgot that before becoming old, he actually absorbed the power of his ring, and could channel it through his hands. He got a new outfit, and started calling himself Sentinel. It didn't last that long, and was kind of erased by the whole Extent thing, since he went back to his old name, costume, and made his own ring again. I don't know, comics are weird, okay guys? The next major thing is that he is involved in Infinite Crisis, though mostly tagging along to the center of the universe to save Alexander Luthor Jr. Mostly it's just so he can have a moment with his daughter while she dies. Oh, and he starts sporting an eye patch because apparently he lost an eye when coming back. Except that's not true because we found out what he was up to in that 11 months in the truly spectacular 52, which was a weekly event comic series that everyone should read. More pressing than all the ongoings he's in, though, we get the 1 year later time skip, which changed up a lot of continuity. Although most of it is explained in 52, which is what made it kind of the best status quo shift DC had ever done. Alan Scott is now the White King at checkmate. Okay, you know what? I'm just going to be talking about the comics themselves for long enough, so speed run. He's in Final Crisis resisting the Justifiers. He's in Blackest Night with the Justice Society fighting Kal-El of Earth 2. In Brightest Day, he goes insane because of the Starheart. That's the magical power that drives Alan Scott's Green Lantern. That's driving people insane, and Alan goes nuts. Gets his Kingdom Come armor, and makes an Emerald City on the moon. He gets better, and the city stays to become a hub for magical folks in the DCU. Finally, he seems to die in the JSA when he unleashes all of his Starheart power to take down a super big bad. Actually, I don't know if that's what was going to stick, because that happened in 2011. And do you know what happened that year? I bet you do. The New 52. Didn't mean for that to rhyme. Earth 2, from the New 52 standpoint, is its own thing again. But the short answer was that the JSA are young heroes, and Alan Scott's gay. There was much bitching about it at the time. And that lasted until 2016, with then the DC Rebirth thing happened. And this is a trip and a half because it's not until Doomsday Clock in 2017, 2019-ish. Yes, I believe it was a 12 issue that lasted 2 years. That we get anything involving Alan Scott again, where Dr. Manhattan just moves Alan Scott's lantern battery like 6 inches out of reach, so he never becomes Green Lantern and dies. Which, for anyone who didn't know, Doomsday Clock is the why of the New 52. And I have thoughts that won't come out here about that. But anyways, by the end, Superman saves the timeline and sets things right. Okay, well, right isn't the right word, because it is another overall rebooted universe. And God only knows what death metal actually was. But this restored timeline means that Alan Scott gets to reunite with his kids, and this is where the main current Earth Prime, is it still Prime Earth? I don't even know if it's like going to be called New Prime Earth or Prime Earth gluten-free. But this is where the main timeline Alan comes out as gay. There was also a one-shot story called The New Golden Age in 2022, where the JSA unravels some big mystery, but anyways, that took long enough, so now we are in 2023, and for the first time in over 70 years, or what feels like the timeline of me starting this title history, Alan Scott has a solo series. But before we can get back to the now, let's take a look at the then. Green Lantern Quarterly, number 1, with stories by Bill Finger and art by Martin Nodell. Except for a couple spots, but I'll talk about them when they show up. And of course, that's if there weren't any ghostwriters or artists on this to make sure that it came out on time, as was kind of the style at the time. But who knows? Also, semi-related, I actually love covering the Golden Age because I can look at the actual comic, like original scans of like the original thing, as well as I'm actually reading primarily from the restored copy, mostly because of fidelity issues. But it is just fun when you check out Golden Age directly because you get some of the best little nuggets of forgotten history, such as when comics would have the first couple pages actually be on their editorial advisory board, and a forward stating that these books have been tested and are proven safe for kids to read. Now, I actually do have the list of the people who were the editorial advisory board during this time up on my Instagram right now at the Comic Archivist if you do want to check it out. And yes, that does include the famous kinky guy, Dr. William Moulton Marston. But there'll be time to reference Marston later. Now we are about 6 pages into this script, so it's time to get on with it. And luckily, we begin with a breakdown of Alan Scott's origin. Excellent. So there's a train wreck, and Alan Scott is a lone survivor, finding a mysterious train lantern. Yet after clearing the crash, he passes out, and the lantern bathes him in green light, and then begins to talk to him. The lantern tells him the tale of how the Green Lantern was forged as a lamp many years ago in China from a meteor that had fallen to Earth. The molten metal of the meteor, licked with green flame, boomed out a prophecy. 3 times shall it flame green. The first, to bring death. The second, to bring life. And the third time, to bring power. I guess you can see where this is going. Well, the Chinese lamp maker then turns the green metal meteor into a lamp. He gets killed, and then the lamp spews green flame to kill his killers. Years later, a lunatic businessman found the green lamp and turned it into a train lantern, where it shone upon him and gave him renewed life. Finally, as Alan Scott lays there after the crash, it fulfills the final prophecy, pulling a Sauron and telling him to forge a ring from parts of the metal, and poof! Magic ring of power to tell him to fight evil. Don't worry, this is fine, it only gets sus in a few decades. Oh, and to be close to hearing about the crimes, Alan Scott starts working at Apex Broadcasting Corporation as a radio engineer in Capital City. No big deal. There we go. Now we're all caught up, and we can actually start these tales. Yeah, I am sorry if you're used to decompressed storytelling. A lot usually happens in the Golden Age books, fast and loose. And this is a quarterly, so it's really going to have fun with those few stories it tells. The first is The Masquerading Mayor. When Irene Miller, the secretary at Apex, has inherited an estate from her grandmother, although after taxes and back debt and everything like that, all she really has left is one racehorse. Alan drives over to check on Irene, mostly just to see if she needs anything, and when he's there, he overhears Irene speaking to Scar Gorgeous. Gorgeous? Just a local scumlord, who's trying to force her to sell Jersey Queen, the racehorse. When Scar tries to force her to sell with the classic negotiation tactic of a beating, Alan Scott comes in and socks the baddies, who threaten vengeance, but they ultimately leave. Irene says how wonderful he is for being so brave, and Alan says that he'd down every gangster if it meant that she'd look at him like that. And then literally in the same breath turns around and asks her about the horses, just to see what all the hubbub is. Basically, the plot is Scar wants to buy Jersey Queen because he's afraid that it'll beat his horse in an upcoming race, which Irene did spend a lot of money to get her horse into. Naturally, that means that later at night, Alan dons his green pants and purple cape, touches his ring to the lantern, charging it up, and then flies off back to the little stables to check on the horse. He arrives just in time to hear Jersey Queen neighing loudly at approaching goons, and he's able to kick their butts, showing off that he's bulletproof and knows how to kick butt. Chasing them off, and Irene gets to make a pass at him, yet again, before he says that she should watch her horse. Of course, that's not the end of the tale. After the thugs go back to Scar actually enacts a plan that probably should have been his first idea, where he leans on Irene's cousin to goad Irene into entering Jersey Queen into some smaller races before the big Mel Bont one, so that pretty much Irene can earn some money to pay back that she entered into the huge race. However, Gerald, her cousin, he actually tricked her into entering a claims race. That would be where the losers have to go up for sale. Jersey Queen loses, and Gerard buys the horse. Thanks to a little bit of an upset, Jersey Queen loses, and Gerald buys that horse. Alan's there, so he at least gets to sock him in the jaw before he and Irene walk off. But that's not the end of Scar's big plan, because he's about to fix the betting pool. Because in the following races, Jersey Queen wins everything. So now she's the favored that everyone's going to bet on, and then Gerald's going to put sponge up her nose? I did not know that was how they cheated back before everyone just used drugs. It was a far more civilized time. That's the plan. Gerald's going to shove some sponge up Jersey Queen's nose the day of the race, so Scar's horse would win, and then they all clean up happily. But superheroes got a super, so Green Lantern goes to Gerald's stable before the race, beats up the guard, rides off on Jersey Queen. Scar then paints a different horse to be Jersey Queen, and then sends thugs to Irene's stables to find the real horse. However, the real horse isn't there. No one's there except for Green Lantern, who blinds them with his green flame and then beats them up. All except for Scar, who GL keeps fully blind, so he'll record a full confession to take off the blindness. GL hands the confession and Scar over to the police. Jersey Queen wins the big race now that Irene is back to being the owner, and GL supposedly kisses Irene as a reward. The next story isn't actually a story. In the original printing, it's a 2-page essay written by Dr. William Moulton Marston about what willpower is, how people can show off willpower, and examples of such. I like it, although willpower may not exactly be something many, including the stories being told here, really attach to Alan Scott's Green Lantern all that well. But maybe that was just the one story we saw, maybe it is different later on. Well, let's move it later on to the next story, Disease. In Capital City, there's an epidemic of pneumonia. Luckily, this is a story that could only happen in 1940s. We're far too advanced 20 years into the 21st century to let an epidemic spread like this, right? And with such an outbreak, the city's supply of pneumonia serum runs out. And the district attorney claims that Boss Filch, another local crime lord because Capital City has a ton of them, is implicated in stealing the hospital's money to get new serum. Which I think the serum may be penicillin, but I don't rightly know if that would have been readily available in the early 40s. I know penicillin came out in the 40s, but that's all. So anyways, that DA is killed mysteriously by being run down by a car, literally the day after he made his claim. Ellen and Irene talk about it and how clearly this was not actually a mystery and someone needs to go get Boss Filch. Naturally, since she says this to the alter ego of a superhero, that's exactly what's about to happen. Well, not really, because Green Lantern goes over there to get him to give up the money, but Filch is saying that he totally doesn't have it. And when his son comes out to say goodnight, GL sees that maybe, just maybe, he's not that heartless, so he flies off. Not knowing where the money is, GL gets an idea. Well, it may not be a great idea for a hero, but hey, going around and stealing the money from bad guys isn't technically a bad idea, considering the US government won't do it for us. Seriously though, he steals the money and gives it to the hospital. But while he's out busting crimes and giving it to the crippled healthcare system, someone else is running around, getting contributions dressed up as Green Lantern too. Luckily, the real Green Lantern visited Irene right after the fake one, so he's able to catch the fake one relatively quick, and then gives those fake donations to the hospital. And that actually pushes the hospital over the budget, so they can now get the serum. But there is still the matter of Boss Filch. GL still feels that he's the one who stole the funds, 'cause duh. So he goes to try and get a confession or the money. Yet while Filch is still denying it, his son actually feels faint and passes out, contracting pneumonia. Filch says that he will sign any confession if GL can get the serum to save his son. So GL bolts off to the approaching plane that has the serum on it, gets it, delivers some to Filch, who then tells him where the real records of the funds are. That is in Commissioner Merrill's office. Yes, the administration of the police has been in on it the whole time. And Filch actually didn't even plan the DA hit and run. That was actually Merrill being skittish. So Green Lantern has the cops come for Filch, and then goes to Commissioner Merrill's office, beats everyone up, gets the record, has to phase through the vault door. Oh yeah, did I mention that he has a whole phasing ability thing? I guess not. But anyways, he then phones the police, and the story ends with Irene doing the now cliche, "Oh, I hope I meet the Green Lantern again," with Alan Scott standing right next to her. Wah, wah, wah. Now, in the original print, we then get a Meet the Creators page on Martin Nodell and Bill Finger. But then we enter the next Green Lantern story, Arson in the Slums. I'm going to try to breeze through this one as best as I can, so we're not here for a half hour before we get to the now and the juicy stuff. There's a wave of buildings burning down in the tenement section of Capital City. That would be slums in our modern vocab. Possibly ghettos, but ghettos in the 40s had a very different connotation than ghettos now. A big media owner starts using his tabloid to say that those old buildings in the area should be evacuated and torn down, even claiming that there will obviously be more fires until the area is abandoned. Yeah, I think everyone can see where this one's already going. This leads Alan Scott to be a bit suspicious, as well it should, so that night he dons his purple cape and investigates. A tenement is already on fire, and GL is there to save someone's trapped child and someone's grandmother. Now, the comic already gives that Barton is involved. Barton is the name of the tabloid guy. He's involved. And yeah, the fire inspector finds a fire-starting device, and Barton's goons beat him up, with GL showing up perfectly in time to see them kidnap him and then speed away. The fire inspector gets thrown in front of a train, but GL saves him. Because these crooks are kinda stupid, they then try to off a reporter who learned that Barton is teamed up with a real estate type guy named Merker. GL saves him and is able to piece the whole thing together, get the tenements torn down so that Barton and Merker can buy the property and build condos on it, or build a parking lot, I don't know. Well, technically he doesn't really piece it together since Merker and Barton go to try and get Commissioner Gray, I'm assuming City Commissioner Gray, to buy the properties in the name of the city so that they can build buildings on it and get a cut from it. But the real fun is GL overhears this, so that night he uses the fire inspector and the reporter to pretend to be ghosts so that Barton and Merker will confess to the whole thing. But I mean, criminals are a superstitious and cowardly lot after all, so that's only natural. There is also then the Sweet Adelaide little comic strip and a prose piece for the character Hop Harrigan. I'm not covering those. And then this leads us to the final story, Green Lantern in South America. Okie dokie. Alan Scott is sent down to repair one of Apex's broadcasting towers in South America, along with his comedic sidekick, Doiby Dickles, who, in my head, sounds like a cross between Archie and Finnegan from Duffy's Tavern. Listen to the Duffy's Tavern on Retrostatic Radio. This is going to be a very 1940s plot, though. Going straight through South America to the fictional country of Landavo, they happen to arrive during a civil war. Being a good company man, Alan makes it to the broadcasting station, and yes, I am skipping some fairly Mexican-like stereotypes here in South America. We find out that it is not a natural civil war. We actually have a classic Nazi spy trying to destabilize the country so it can be a staging ground for an invasion of America. That is honestly truly a classic story, sadly. Also classic, Doiby is mistaken for a spy and kidnapped by the rebels. Don't worry though, Alan luckily packed his garish costume and the Green Lantern, so he suits up and flies off. Doiby is about to be executed by the rebels, who also happen to be goaded by the German spy. GL saves Doiby, who is the one that actually beats up the spy, so cool on him. And GL flies off to take out the entire rebel army, so the democratically elected president of the country can stay in power, clearly as a benevolent leader. And that's everything from that book. Now, usually I do get into how I feel about the book here, and then after I do my basic breakdown of the now, go into the comparison or at least a discussion, but I am going to save that for the conclusion, after we get to the hot topic comic that everyone's here to talk about, because I think I know where I'm going to come from at this, but we got to see what happens with the now. So now on to Alan Scott, The Green Lantern #1, came out in 2023. Written by Tim Sheridan, art by Cian Tormey, colors by Matt Herms, and letters by Lucas Gattoni. Sorry if I mispronounce anyone's name. We begin in 1941, in the FBI headquarters of J. Edgar Hoover. No, I'm not sure if he's wearing a girdle under that suit or not. Hoover is talking to Green Lantern about his involvement with the JSA. GL says that he agrees to have his name on the team, but he works alone. Hoover pulls out a file marked Alan Scott, revealing that he knows GL's real identity, and a lot more dirt that will get him to join the team. And yes, some of that blackmail is pictures of Alan Scott with another man, plus a journal. And you guessed it, there's the ultimatum. Join the team or be outed. Smash cut to California 1936, with Alan Scott shirtless in bed with Army hottie Johnny Ladd. Alan Scott is very wishy-washy about going to bed with Johnny, because while he does truly love Johnny, he's still in the 1930s, so there will always be a feeling that what he's doing is wrong, and a sin that does weigh heavy on him when he thinks about it. Pretty much one of those things where he can be playful back and forth, but then when it's like, alright, let's do it, he's like, should we? Just a tip maybe. But Ladd gives this great speech about love being love. Now I do have one problem with this. Now let me put on my brainy specs for a second. Dear Mr. Sheridan, DC Pride #1 clearly states that Alan Scott's first love was Jimmy Henton. How dare you get continuity so wrong? And speaking of wrong continuity, in Masters of the Universe, please note that I am joking about that. I don't think DC Pride was set in the Dawn of DC version of Prime Earth, although I do also think that DC keeps using Prime Earth way too much, that it shouldn't be Prime Earth. But that's my own nerd gripe, especially when doing histories and breakdowns where I have to read a lot of things that go, this is Prime Earth, this is Prime Earth. Hey, Marvel's Prime Earth now too. So in 1930s, Alan Scott joins the Army Corps of Engineers and was assigned to the top secret project, the Crimson Flame, a U.S. project to harness the power of a potentially mystic flame called the Crimson Flame. And Johnny and Alan are the ones who invented the containment unit for something that may not exist. Of course, this is comics, so why wouldn't it exist? Back in the 40s, Alan Scott returns to his brownstone after his meeting with Hoover, and he is explaining it to his pal Doiby Dickles about the blackmail before a massive police squad squeals by. And Alan naturally rings up to get into the purple cape and phases through the wall to chase after them. Back in the 30s. They've discovered the Crimson Flame, but it's not just a little bit of a red glow, or rather an intelligent energy thing that attacks the ship, interrupting a sweet moment when Johnny gave Alan a gold ring. So yes, naturally, this is not going to end well. But we don't get to see that end because we cut to the present. Well, GL's present, as he arrives on the scene of the police thing, cutting in between the past of trying to contain the Crimson Flame and the presence of dealing with a gunman. Both stories reach their peak at the same time, with Johnny Ladd being pulled away by the tendrils of red energy, and in the present, Green Lantern holds the drowned body of Ladd. Dun dun dun! Oh, and there is a stinger for the next issue, which is a splash page of Alan being held down with electrodes on his head, with the next issue being called Conversion. I wonder what it's going to be about. Oh, and it's actually Arkham Asylum he's committed to, so that's just our little spoiler. Oh, and in the past we actually get a reference to the Golden Age prophecy when the Crimson Flame was pulling him away with saying, "First we bring death." Not comparing the two, I do like this issue. I actually think it's great. It has a great setup, it makes Alan Scott interesting enough to follow, and yes, he was made gay like 3 years ago before Infinite Frontier, and even then, 10 years ago with the New 52. So all the butthurt people about it are just being butthurt because of the gays, not because of the content. The quality is there. But let's actually get into the part where I talk about comparing these and Alan Scott as a whole. So what's the conclusion to draw here? The conclusion to draw is that, despite revisionism, comics are about social justice. Now, there is the camp that focuses on the power fantasy and the escapist aspects, mainly those from a 90s lean when a lot of people went for big art over storytelling. The first Green Lantern book had stories that were about fixing a race, about a healthcare system being taken advantage of by those in power. Arson in the Slums is about arsons in the slums because media moguls and real estate sharks are assholes who want money. And okay, Green Lantern in South America was an American going to a foreign country and helping squash a rebellion because of a German spy, so that's just foreshadowing to every American interest during the Cold War, so I will give that one to the New Wave Worthams. I'll meet you halfway, hippies. But, while there were cops, and most of the vigilantes in the Golden Age books never really outright went after them, except for the corrupt ones, they were all still socially minded. Now yes, in the 2020s, they're very conservative books. Alan Scott, while dressing like he was in a closet, does have a love interest in Irene Miller. However, also in the 2020s, that's very readable as him legit only ever having a single panel to say how much he likes her, but it is also quite readable as him playing a part. He only legitimately has one single panel where we actually hear him say how much he likes her, and he says it in such a flowery way, and then in the same breath immediately jumps to, oh, what's over here? What happened? What's the hubbub, bub? It's hilariously easy to read him as queer-coded, similar to Iceman in the original Uncanny X-Men. It is all about hindsight and what you want to project. No, neither the original Iceman or Alan Scott were originally written to be gay, but given how forcefully manly Alan Scott wants to be, he comes off as a kind of closeted person. And Iceman, of course, was written as the youngest member of the team, so he had a bit more fruity of a personality. Yes, like I did say in the Uncanny X-Men Then and Now, when talking about Iceman, it is because that's just shorthand writing. Because for the Golden Age, you have 12 to 15 pages of complete stories, versus the Marvel Age of the 60s, which was still mostly compressed storytelling, but it was long-form continuity. And now we live in the post-decompressed story era, where mainstream companies would rather write for a trade than write single issues. Now with that said, Alan Scott being gay and dealing with societal issues of the 40s is very much in line with how a book could have been if we didn't have such a conservative mindset at the time, and if Alan Scott could ever find a great niche being solo. Spoilers, Alan Scott is my second favorite character for the JSA, but he has been a perfect ensemble person with some solo stories than an actual solo person. And Tim Sheridan made a good book that showed while you can have a character work, whether they're gay or not. Literally, if you made Johnny Ladd a female, and it was just some other sort of forbidden romance, it could still work, mostly. Conversion therapy might be a little weird if it's, I'm doing the general's daughter. Weirder things have happened. It is not a badly written book. It is actually very, very good. But here's the rub. And honestly, this feels like a mini-series, I believe it's 6 issues, that I'm assuming is leading to a JSA mini or an ongoing. And if so, I nominate myself to write the Wildcat miniseries set in the 40s. I have a pitch. The whole reason I did this one, besides the fact that I like Tim Sheridan's writing on this, is because there is a greater problem in comics than diamond distribution. There's a bigger problem than the price points that do price comics out of being as big as they once were. And it's not even the air quote liberals who have something to say writing comics now. Social justice and social issues are embedded into the core of what comics are as a medium. Their beating heart is a power fantasy that there can be someone to stand up to the injustices of the world when no law can, when no justice can be given. People caring more about engagement and selling their own product are the major guiding force in social media when it comes to comics today. There are really great people talking about comics. Most of them are smaller accounts. They say that they are comic fans. These right-wingers say that they are comic fans, but will only ever degrade comics. And many of them only focus on Marvel and DC, because those are the big 2 names that will get the most attention. The only time that they would ever go after an actual indie book, or any other company, let's say Image Comics, is when they support social issues, such as LGBT plus inequality by having pride-themed variant covers for their top-selling books, Or when Savage Dragon moves to Canada because a failed businessman who's gone broke 3 goddamn times gets elected into the White House solely because the DNC really wanted Hillary and to pad their numbers with teasing Bernie. All politics is bullshit, but you can't cry it's not bigotry when the leadership in your little group and the people you defend as the saviors of comics are solely making their money and making their points using bigotry. I'm going to say it. Comicsgate, as a group, is a hate group. Not because every member believes that the gays are to blame for everything. There are legit fans and creators under that hashtag because they believe in comics and do want better comics. However, they will stand by and allow, and even agree with, or at least defend people like Della Rose, who points out why Alan Scott the Green Lantern is a bad book, is because it, to quote him, glorifies sin, and is totally just filled with sodomy. It's not. Is there a tragic love story between 2 gay men? Yes. Is it in the text? Absolutely. Is it bad? No. You can say, well, I don't want to read this, and you know what? That's fine. Just like with sexual preference, you like what you like. And it's just being a dick when instead of bolstering what you do like, you want to tear down what you don't. Now, if you turned around and said, oh, I don't like this book because I don't like constant time skips. I don't think they're that egregious. I've read a lot worse. Or maybe you don't like the flowery narrative of the journal. That is actually, in context and content, a reason you may not like it. You may not like the art. I don't know why. It's great art. But you might not like that. Those are valid criticisms. Saying, goddamn gays are sinners, that is not a criticism. So there's my conclusion. Learn comic history. Realize you are on the side of Frederick Wortham. And just engage with comics. Not the politics other people are pushing. Engage with the content and context. Buy the comics. Even if you want to bitch about them, buy them. And with that said, I'm going to go read the Vampire Lestat, because I forgot that I had that in physical. Some pretty good hetero reading material right there. Oh, and the next one of these is going to be Birds of Prey. But I am done for today. Like, share, complain about it on Twitter, Facebook, even Instagram if you're really desperate for attention. But more than anything, remember, this is a discussion. Be excellent to one another. Don't let hate become the norm. And as always, stay golden, Inklings. I'm dropping the mic now.